Welcome back to the deep dive, where we like to take a big stack of research and boil it down to like the most interesting stuff. And today we're going back to like the beginning of the CIA.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, like all the cloak and dagger stuff.
Yeah.
Decisions with huge global impacts. We're going to be looking at this book by Evan Thomas, The Very Best Men. It's got it all, Cold War paranoia, like really big personalities and operations that honestly seem like they came straight out of like a spy novel.
Yeah, it's wild how these early years shaped not only the agency itself, but, America's role in world affairs. It's really a story about how this group of mostly Ivy League guys, like totally fueled by, Cold War anxieties, made choices that we're still feeling the effects of today.
Right. Right, yeah. The book starts with Frank Wisner, who was like the architect of the CIA's covert operations. So picture this, right? An aristocratic Southern lawyer, like oozing charm, and with this like unshakable belief in fighting communism. Mm-hmm. He actually like truly believed that he and his colleagues were, quote, honorable men engaged in like a righteous crusade.
Yeah, and it's so important to remember the context, like the whole post-World War II era was like totally dominated by this fear of Soviet expansion. And these men, they really felt a moral obligation to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, stopping Stalin must have felt as urgent as like stopping Hitler just, a few years earlier. But here's where things get really interesting, right? So Wisner, he was dealing with manic depression.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that probably fueled his drive, his ambition, but it also led to some pretty tragic consequences later on.
Yeah, definitely. The book goes into detail about some of the CIA's early operations. Like, they were trying to influence elections in Italy. They were running psychological warfare campaigns. And there was even this massive operation to tap into like Soviet communication lines in Berlin.
Oh yeah, the Berlin Tunnel. That's a perfect example of the tension between traditional espionage and the allure of all this new technology. I mean, it was a bold move. It took massive resources, and it really shows how committed they were to like staying one step ahead in the intelligence game.
Absolutely. And all of this was happening in this like atmosphere of intense Cold War paranoia, Yeah. But these actions, they weren't without consequences. One example is the CIA's involvement in overthrowing the Arbenz government in Guatemala in 1954.
Yeah, that's right. And that operation, which was seen as a success at the time, it really emboldened the agency, and it also set a pretty dangerous precedent for future interventions.
Right.
It kind of solidified this idea that covert action could be a tool for regime change, and that's a precedent that would have like lasting effects.
And it's a slippery slope, isn't it? From Guatemala, we see the CIA getting involved in riskier and more morally ambiguous operations.
Yeah.
There were plots to assassinate figures like Fidel Castro, Patrice Lumumba, and even Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic.
Right, and that was a real turning point. It marked a significant shift away from the CIA's original, intelligence gathering mission, and it really raises questions about, their expanding role and the justifications they use for these actions.
That's a great point, and this is where Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA's technical services staff come in, right? Sure. I mean, they were experimenting with LSD for like mind control, and they were also tasked with developing ways to eliminate these leaders.
Yeah, it's a chilling reminder of how far the agency strayed from its initial purpose. These actions were highly controversial, and they were fueled by, Cold War anxieties, but also by these internal power struggles within the CIA itself.
It's fascinating and a little bit scary, honestly. Speaking of power struggles, the book introduces us to Richard Bissell. He was a brilliant but like really abrasive economist who joined the CIA.
Oh yeah, Bissell.
Yeah.
His arrival signaled a real shift towards a more analytical, data-driven approach within the agency. He was the mastermind behind the U-2 spy plane, a technological marvel that really revolutionized intelligence gathering.
Wow. Yeah. So he was much more methodical than Wisner, but he also had this like almost reckless confidence in his own abilities, and this clash of personalities, it had a huge impact on the agency's trajectory, especially in the lead up to the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Oh, absolutely. The Bay of Pigs, which was, you know, Bissell's brainchild was a colossal failure. It really shook the CIA to its core, and it led to President Kennedy's like deep distrust of the agency. It exposed the flaws in Bissell's over-reliance on technology and his misjudgment of Castro's, resilience. And this event, it forced a real reckoning within the CIA about the limits of covert action and the need for much more careful planning and oversight.
Yeah, I mean, here we have these larger than life figures operating in this like shadowy world and making choices that literally shaped history. It makes you think about like the weight of their decisions and the moral dilemmas they faced. Were they really acting in the best interest of their country, or did they get like consumed by the allure of covert power?
It's a tough question. There's no easy answer.
Right.
It's something that historians are still debating today.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a story that makes you think, and we're going to dive even deeper into it after the break. So stay with us.
It really is a story that just keeps you thinking, And the Bay of Pigs was definitely a turning point, like not only for the CIA, but for the people involved, Like how they reacted to such a public and pretty devastating failure. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. The book definitely gets into that, like the impact it had on key figures like Wisner and Bissell. But before we like go there, I'm curious about some of the other, personalities who were involved in shaping the early days of the CIA.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole cast of characters who deserve attention. One who really stands out is Tracy Barnes, like dashing, adventurous, a real-life embodiment of the Cold War spy.
Oh, wow. He sounds like he came straight out of like a James Bond movie. What was his background?
Well, he was a Wall Street lawyer who just like craved action, and he found it during World War II. He was dropped behind enemy lines in France, and later on he ran covert operations in Switzerland. He really embodied the kind of men who were drawn to the CIA in those days, like driven by patriotism, but also by this thirst for adventure, and this desire to test their limits.
Yeah, it sounds like he had a real knack for the cloak and dagger world. What kind of role did he play in the CIA?
Barnes was like amazing at influencing people, charming, persuasive. He knew how to work a room. He became a key player in recruiting agents, setting up front organizations, and even coming up with some pretty outlandish psychological warfare schemes.
Oh, wow. Psychological warfare. Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So in Guatemala, Barnes orchestrated this whole campaign of disinformation and psychological manipulation. They spread rumors, they staged fake attacks, and they even tried to make Castro's beard fall out.
Wait, they tried to make his beard fall out?
Yeah, using some kind of like depilatory powder.
That's a detail you don't forget. It seems almost comical now, but I guess it shows how seriously they took psychological warfare back then.
It does. It highlights their belief in the power of these tactics, even the seemingly absurd ones. But it's important to remember that Barnes, he wasn't like a rogue agent. He was close to both Wisner and Bissell, and his actions often reflected their thinking.
So it was this like inner circle of CIA operatives, connected socially and ideologically, who were really shaping the agency's direction. The book mentions the Georgetown set, these elite Washington insiders who had a lot of influence in policy circles. And apparently they also knew how to party.
Yeah, the Georgetown set, it gives you a glimpse into the culture surrounding the early CIA. These were individuals who moved in the same circles, they shared a worldview, and they truly believed they were the best and the brightest, tasked with safeguarding the world from communism.
But as you mentioned, there were like cracks beneath the surface, right? I mean, Wisner's mental health was declining. Barnes was struggling with the moral implications of his actions, and Bissell's confidence was shattered after the Bay of Pigs.
Right, and these internal conflicts and personal struggles, they really humanized these figures. They weren't just like Cold War warriors. They were flawed individuals wrestling with impossible choices.
Yeah, it reminds us that behind these grand historical events, there were real people grappling with doubt and fear and the consequences of their actions. Mm-hmm. Speaking of the Bay of Pigs, like how did such a seemingly doomed operation get approved in the first place?
Well, that's a question that has puzzled historians for decades, and the book offers some pretty valuable insights. It seems that Bissell, eager to prove himself after the U-2 incident, He overestimated the CIA's capabilities, and he underestimated Castro's resolve.
So there was like a level of overconfidence at play.
Definitely. There was also this sense of urgency, like a belief that action was needed to prevent the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere. And Bissell seems to have downplayed the risks, and perhaps even withheld information to shield the operation from scrutiny.
So the concept of plausible deniability, which was like central to covert operations,
yeah,
it backfired spectacularly in this case.
Exactly. Plausible deniability basically meant, creating a situation where a government could deny knowledge of or responsibility for actions taken by its agents. And in the case of the Bay of Pigs, this strategy completely collapsed, leaving the Kennedy administration, exposed and embarrassed.
And the failure, it not only damaged the CIA's reputation, but it also fueled these internal rivalries, right?
Yeah.
How did key players like Wisner and Barnes react to this debacle?
Well, Wisner, who was already, struggling with his mental health, he was deeply affected by it. It confirmed his anxieties about the CIA's ability to effectively challenge the Soviets, and it likely contributed to his tragic suicide later on.
Yeah, that's a stark reminder of the personal toll these events took. What about Barnes? How did he fare after the Bay of Pigs?
Barnes was also deeply impacted, but he managed to remain involved for a while. He continued running covert operations, including efforts to destabilize Castro's regime.
But the book suggests that he became increasingly troubled by the ethical compromises that this work entailed.
Absolutely. There's this growing sense of disillusionment in Barnes, a feeling that the lines between right and wrong had become blurred. And ultimately this catches up with him. He's forced out of the CIA, his reputation tarnished by association with some of the agency's more questionable activities.
It seems like the price of operating in this shadowy world finally caught up with him.
In a way, yes. Barnes represents the tragic side of the early CIA. He was a talented, charismatic man who believed in serving his country, but he was ultimately undone by the very system he helped create.
Yeah, his story raises the question, did these men, despite their flaws and mistakes, did they ultimately make the world a safer place? Or did their actions, sow the seeds of future conflicts and mistrust?
Those are complex questions, with no easy answers. But by understanding the motivations and the decisions and the consequences faced by these individuals, we can gain a deeper understanding of this pivotal period in history, and perhaps learn some valuable lessons about the use and abuse of power in the name of national security.
It's a fascinating and thought-provoking subject for sure, and I'm eager to hear more about how the CIA evolved after the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
So the Bay of Pigs, it really forced this reckoning within the CIA. How did the agency change and evolve after such a public failure?
Well, the fallout from the Bay of Pigs, it had this huge impact on the CIA's whole approach to covert operations. It basically ushered in this new era of being more cautious, less focus on these bold interventions and a renewed focus on intelligence gathering and analysis.
So less emphasis on regime change and more on just trying to understand the global landscape, right?
Exactly. The agency, they needed to rebuild their credibility, and regain the trust of the president. And this led to the rise of figures like Richard Helms, who really embodied this new approach.
Helms, he was pretty different from Wisner and Bissell's, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He represented a different breed of CIA officer, less flamboyant, less driven by ideology, and much more focused on meticulous planning and mitigating risks. He preferred operating in the shadows and believed in staying out of the headlines.
So a less impulsive and a more strategic approach.
Precisely. And Helms's rise, it reflected this broader shift in the political climate. The Kennedy administration, chastened by the Bay of Pigs, they became much more wary of covert action. They wanted results, but they also demanded deniability.
So the CIA had to like adapt. Right. They had become more sophisticated and more discreet in their messages.
Exactly. And that's what we see happening in the latter part of the book. The CIA, they continue to operate in the shadows, but their actions, they became more measured, more focused on intelligence gathering and analysis and less on direct interventions.
But the agency was still involved in some major events during this period, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. The book touches on the CIA's role in events like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the assassination of Diem in Vietnam, and the early stages of the war in Laos.
Wow, these were all like incredibly complex situations with huge, far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely, and they highlight the challenging and often controversial role of the CIA during the Cold War. The agency was operating in this world of shifting alliances and political intrigue and constant danger. Even when their actions were well intentioned, they often had unintended and sometimes like really devastating consequences.
It reminds us that history is rarely black and white. These individuals were operating in this gray zone, making decisions with imperfect information and often facing like impossible moral choices.
Yeah, and that's precisely what makes the book so thought provoking. It doesn't offer easy answers or judge its subjects. It simply presents their stories, their triumphs, their failures, and leaves it to the reader to draw their own conclusions.
It's a book that really stays with you long after you finish reading it. It raises these profound questions about the nature of power, the use of secrecy, and the balance between national security and individual rights.
And it reminds us that even the most powerful institutions are made up of individuals, people with their own ambitions, their own flaws, and their own capacity for both good and evil.
That's a great point. So what can we learn from these early days of the CIA? What insights can we apply to our understanding of the world today?
Well, I think there are several key takeaways. First, we need to be wary of the allure of covert action. It's seductive. It promises these quick solutions, but it often carries hidden costs and unpredictable consequences.
Yeah, it seems like a slippery slope.
Yeah.
With the potential for abuse, especially in a climate of fear and paranoia.
Exactly. Second, we have to remember that even the best and the brightest can make mistakes. Intelligence gathering is an imperfect science, and covert operations are inherently risky, So we need to be cautious. We need to demand accountability and constantly question assumptions.
Right. And finally, we need to acknowledge the human costs of these actions. The men and women who operate in the shadows, they often pay a heavy price, both personally and professionally. They deserve our respect, but also our scrutiny.
Absolutely. Understanding the pressures, the temptations, and the moral dilemmas they face can help us better evaluate the actions of those in power and the long-term consequences of their choices.
It's a powerful message that really resonates, in today's world. If this deep dive has left you hungry for more, we highly recommend checking out Evan Thomas's book, The Very Best Men. It's a captivating read full of incredible stories and insights that offer a really unique window into this pivotal period in history. You can find a link to purchase the book in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a must read for anyone who's interested in understanding the origins of the CIA and its lasting impact on the world.
Absolutely, and don't forget to subscribe to the deep dive for more explorations into fascinating topics delivered straight to your ears. Until next time, stay curious.